exile. For now.
Hello everyone, Cannonlowy here, and Delirium League is coming to an end within less than 2 weeks. So I have a couple of build guides that I wanted to see if anyone was interested in. So the first one is my Stormblast Mine character, and the second will be my Hollow Palm character that I got to a slightly higher level. But I wanted to do Stormblast Mine because I really feel that Stormblast Mine is very underappreciated when it comes to comparing it to Icicle Mine and Pyroclast Mine. So Stormblast Mine pretty much only is used for leveling purposes because it's a level 1 mine and it has some very interesting effects that really helps in the early game. And I'm talking about that each mine applies 3% increased damage taken to enemies near it up to 150%. And honestly, I would suggest if anyone is thinking about using an aura bot character that has a ton of auras, Stormblast Mine would be probably the really beneficial for those characters if you can apply that increase damage to a large area as well as increasing the mine duration. So Stormblast Mine pretty much just does lightning damage in an area effect, and that is slightly different of course from the other two mines. Icicle Mine uses projectiles, so you can easily use the projectile mods like chaining, forking, and piercing. And Pyroclast Mine uses projectiles, but they're more like Molten Strike, and that they just kind of fall to the ground and explode. And people usually use Pyroclast Mine for bosses, and then Icicle Mine for delving, or something along those lines for an example. So, getting into the gear here, I have a +3 level of all lightning spell skill gems, and then increased spell damage and mine throwing speed with a multi-craft on it, and then a increased critical strike chance for spells. And pretty much that is the most important thing, is getting that crit chance for spells, as well as the spell damage and the +3 level of all lightning spell gems. And that applies to every single spell that is lightning based, of course. And then I decided to use increased mine throwing speed because I honestly thought that was more important than a tiny bit extra critical strike multiplier. So I decided to just multi-mod this. It is very difficult to find a +5 level of all spell gems on a staff, so I just decided to go with a +3, and it is honestly a really good staff. So this staff cost me 3 exalts to buy, and then Warmonger multi-crafted it for me, which I think is 3 or 4 exalts to multi-craft. and then an exalt for the spell damage. So this is probably like a 7 or 8 exalt staff by itself, but I would say it is definitely the most important part of this entire setup here. So I have for the rings, Mark of the Shaper to get that massive increased spell damage and lightning spell damage with the caster modifier quality for Catalyst, and then I needed a little bit of extra strength, so strength, life, and then energy shield and resist for this. For the amulet, high resist, life, and then there's also +1 level of all lightning skill gems. While I was playing this character, I didn't even realize that the Crusader could get +1 level of all lightning skill gems, and that, in my opinion at least, is more powerful than a crit strike multiplier modifier. Now, I could technically get a critical strike multiplier if I didn't have the +3 life gained mod, but I wasn't really going to bother worrying about that. And then for the helmet, the Vertex was a very solid choice for me because I didn't really have a huge number of evasion or energy shield, and the Vertex by far has the highest amount of both of those. Granted, it doesn't have a life mod on it, but I felt like the increase to evasion and energy shield was good enough to make up for it. And it also gives you +1 level of all socketed skills, so +1 Enlighten, and then all of my auras basically. Now the chest armor definitely was a little bit more expensive. I think I got a little bit lucky with the mods on it, and I don't remember how much I paid for the item itself. I think it might have been a few exalts, so I probably got extremely lucky on that. But what I wanted was spells have extra crit chance. You can apply an additional curse, and then life, and then whatever defense I could get out of it, and then dexterity. I needed a little bit of extra dexterity to sustain some of my other items and skill gems. So for the belt, just a strength and then resist defense belt. Same thing for the gloves, just resist. And then the big thing is that the fingerless silk gloves have the increased spell damage, so a little bit of extra bump. Now for the enchantment, I do believe Commandment of the Tempest is better than Commandment of Thunder, because Commandment of Thunder you have to actually kill stuff, and the problem with that is that mines do not actually count towards this. You have to actually kill something with self-casting rather than using mines. So the Tempest on hit, you can activate it with using whatever skill that you use in addition to Stormblast Mine. And then for Agony, two-toned boots, and you have Tailwind if you have dealt a critical strike recently, which is what Wave of Conviction is primarily for, well, aside from doing debuffs. That activates Tailwind, because again, if you're using mines or traps or any kind of indirect damage, you cannot activate Tailwind with those skills. It has to be a direct self-caster, self-used skill. And then movement speed cannot be chilled, cannot be frozen, high resist, and high life on it. So that is the gear. Now, I forgot to say this at the beginning, but if there's any part of this that you want to skip to, I will be doing timestamps just like any of my build guides. So, the links. The primary link is Stormblast Mine with Trap and Mine damage support, Wakened added lightning damage support, Inspiration, Charged Mine, and Minefield. Now, for Minefield support, you can actually use Swift Assembly instead of Minefield. It's all down to personal preference, whichever you think feels better. I think that Swift Assembly feels more fluid, but Minefield support is way more consistent, and that's why I decided to use Minefield support over it. Charge Mines, because I heavily rely on charges. I have 5 power charges and 4 frenzy charges, I do believe. So getting that extra 40% mind throwing speed is very useful, as well as the super high crit chance that I get from my power charges. So I effectively get over 65% from just charge mine as well as the power charge itself, and then I have 8% crit chance from this node here, as well as a little bit of crit multi. So from each power charge I get like 73% increased crit chance per power charge, and that is very handy. Inspiration to not only get more elemental damage, but it also increases the crit chance just that little bit more, and it also has a low mana multiplier. Now, what I didn't know about Inspiration Support is that how mines work is that since they act like auras, Inspiration Support doesn't actually it doesn't reduce the mana cost of it. So that 34% reduced mana cost is completely useless for mines. And it does say that basically any type of thing that's considered a minion cannot gain inspiration charges. I really find that to be misleading for this support, because as you can see here, I get inspiration charges from using mines. So originally I didn't think that inspiration support would even do anything to mines, but as you can see here, it increases my damage and I get inspiration charges basically like normal. I'm not sure why. I just find that line to be really misleading. So trap and mind damage support, there was one support that you can put in that does basically the same. Oh yeah, controlled destruction support does the same damage. If you get the awakened version, I think it does the same damage while not reducing your mind throwing speed, but that's only if you have high enough crit chance to support that. Awakened added lightning support is pretty much only useful if you get it to level 5. I mean, it's good, but there are other better support gems on it if you don't have it level 5 for the +1 level of lightning gems. So for the second most important link, I have Wave of Conviction. Now I use Wave of Conviction for pretty much my entire debuffing setup in one go, in one cast. So I have Awakened Curse on hit, which, let me tell you that this was kind of tricky to get, because not only is the skill gem incredibly expensive, I think it was 8 or 9 Exalted Orbs by itself for the gem, and that is because you can get an additional curse with it. And also the first time that we tried to buy a level 1 version, it was a scam, so yay. But with the setup, I have Wave of Conviction, Awakened Curse on hit, Conductivity, Assassin's Mark, Elemental Weakness, and Arcane Surge support. So I get Arcane Surge, and the enemy gets 3 curses on them, all in one cast. And also, it is some Wave of Conviction also adds Exposure, and since I have enough lightning stuff that it does double the lightning damage as it does fire damage, most of the time it will have the lightning exposure. So basically, against normal enemies, they get like minus 100% resistance as soon as I use that. And if it's a boss, then it's more like 50%, but that's still huge in my opinion. So the extra... Oh, and another thing before I forget, Wave of Conviction is also perfect for Arcane Surge because it has that 48% if you have a high enough level 1 to skill effect duration, and that also affects the duration of Arcane Surge. So as you can see here, it lasts 6 seconds instead of 4. And doesn't look like it affects the curses though. according to this, unfortunately. But since Arcane Surge only lasts 6 seconds, I should be using it every 6 seconds anyway. Okay, secondly, I have Steel Skin, level 19, with level 17 cast when damage taken support. This is just purely for defense, just to add a little bit of extra tankiness of 2600 extra, 2000 extra hit points. And then increased duration with Fall Righteous Fire. So Steel Skin lasts 2.6 seconds. So good enough to at least take 1 or 2 hits within that time. And then Vol Righteous Fire, I have it purely because of the 28% more spell damage. I rarely remember to use it, but in some instances it can be handy, especially if you have increased duration support on it to make it last 7 seconds. If you don't have increased duration support, I wouldn't even bother using it. 4 seconds is just too short for that. And then I have increased duration support with Precision, level 1, Symphonic Trap, and Smoke Mine. So the increased duration is mostly for Symphon Trap, which I actually do use for a specific purpose. It's not just for the mana and life recovery. It is also to proc stuff from the Ascendency that I'll get into. And then for the auras, I have Herald of Thunder, Discipline, Wrath, and Enlighten. And then I also have Vol Discipline, just to make sure that if I'm in a hairy situation, I can instantly start the recharge of Energy Shield, which is really handy with the Delirium mechanic. For the flasks, I have a Sulphur Flask, Basalt Flask, Stibunite Flask, Jade Flask, and then a Panicked Divine Flask. So with the Sebutor Ascendency, you actually get quite a bit of life regen. That's why I decided not to use an Eternal one and just try to get an instant flask. But overall, just get as much evasion as I can, as well as getting a tiny bit of physical damage reduction. And then the Sulphur Flask, I was actually going to use Bottled Faith, but Bottled Faith is like, depending on when you get it in the league, is like 12 plus exalts by itself. So that's why I don't have that. So before I get into the tech tree, I would say the skill tree. I keep saying skill tree. I would recommend using the detonate mines on your movement left mouse button, because pressing D every single time you want to activate mines just makes it feel 10 times more awkward than it needs to be. And I didn't know that you could put it on your left mouse button until I was quite well on my way, so I kind of wish I knew about that earlier. So now you know, put that on your movement skill, unless you have another button like a special mouse with multiple keys to put it on instead, because pressing D every time, just no. Okay, for the Ascendancy, I have Sebutor, of course, with Explosive Expert, Pyromaniac, Bomb Specialist, and Demolition Specialist. I would say you could probably get rid of Pyromaniac if you really wanted Born in the Shadows, which does give you quite a bit of defense, but the regen, the reduced mana reserve, the life, the immunity to ignite and shock, I just thought that it was a lot more useful for me personally. But you could definitely do Born in Shadows if you really want. Explosive Expert, that's why I have Symphonic Trap, as well as on my offhand, which I forgot to mention before, I have Bear Trap. Now, honestly, I never remember to use this, so this honestly might as well not even exist. But I have Bear Trap with Unbound Ailments, Combustion Support, Ignite Proliferation, Awakened, added fire damage, and increased duration. The whole point of that was to ignite enemies with Bear Trap, and then have the Bear Trap debuff as well as the Ignite last 6 or 7 seconds. But yeah, like I said, I never remember to use it, and this Invictus was just for the off chance I get Rampage. But overall, just not necessary in the slightest. But if I ignited enemies, then I get 30% crit multiplier, and if I did Symphony Trap, then I would gain 10% elemental penetration, which is very useful in my opinion. So, this is what I ended up my tree looking like. I'll take a quick look in Path of Building as well after this, but this is pretty much the gist of what I had. I'm level 94, so there isn't a huge number of points that I have on top of this. So the main points is that I grab all the clusters down here, these three and these three for defense. These three are good for reducing the mana reserve. My mana reserve is only 10 per mine, and I have 70% increased mana regen if you cast a spell recently. And Detonate Mines for some reason counts as a spell, so that procs it every single time you detonate your mine. So you're getting 70% mana regen every single time you cast Detonate Mines. And with those two combined, as well as Arcane Surge, I have not had any mana problems. And that was something that I was quite worried about when I started using a mine character. But overall, the mana regen from the enchantment was enough to sustain it. And for the enchantment for the helmet, you can pretty much go for anything that improves whatever you want. The problem is that helmet enchantments are so hard to get for anything useful that I wouldn't bother unless you like doing the Eternal Labyrinth just that much or have a really good deal. But anyway, I get Charisma as well. One thing to keep in mind is that since mines are auras, they benefit from every single node that has increased effect or increased area of effect of auras. So Charisma, even though that it is supposed to only increase the effect of auras, since mines are considered auras, you get an increased effect of the debuff that Stormblast Mine does, which increases the damage that enemies take. I grab the mine nodes here, and I went for the crit multiplier on that one. And then for level 94, I get a Watcher's Eye with just some lightning pen from using Wrath, as well as being lucky enough to find one that has something else useful on it. This was only a few exalts. I don't think it was super expensive, but if you only wanted the Wrath node, that was pretty much only like one exalt worth, but it increases the damage by quite a bit, so I would recommend getting it if you can. Getting the frenzy charges, this group here, and then starting with the damage. So I pretty much focus on dealing as much damage as I can with this build. I didn't really focus too much on defense. Blast Cascade, Doomcast, Written in Blood for the 2 points. The influence, because it actually, like I said, increasing the effect of the auras adds quite a bit of damage. For this cluster, I went for the mine throwing speed and detonating speed, but honestly, you could definitely go for these two damage nodes if you want instead. I just want these two because of mine throwing speed I felt was more of my limiting factor than flat out damage. Successive detonations, Arcane Expanse, Essence Surge, and then up here I do something creative with the Thread of Hope. If you can get a Thread of Hope that is corrupted and has some sort of good usage out of it, that would be pretty handy. I found this one for pretty cheap. Silence is pretty much never really an issue, so that doesn't really do much, but you want a medium ring for what I allocated. So I allocated the Heart and Soul, a Cruel Preparation, and the Heart of Thunder with the Thread of Hope, and I think that was a good use of 3, well, ending up being 5 points. Because Heart of Thunder not only gives me a tiny bit of energy shield leech if I hit with Wave of Conviction, because again, mines, you cannot leech from mines unless you have some unique modifier that does so. I think there's only one item in the game that allows you to do that. But this has lightning penetration on it, which is quite important. And then I decided to get sacrifice this 5% life node to get Heart and Soul, which gives me more anyway, increasing the mana and life, and then life and resist. And then I decided to get the power charge node, since I have 5 total from here and there, and then get Unnatural Calm. So with that, let's look at the path of building. Alright, in path of building, so the major changes that I did in the path of building. Oh, and I forgot to mention, with the bandits, I chose to get Illyria, something that I don't really think about. Pretty much 99% of the time I get the 2 passive skill points, but this is one of the rare times I actually get Illyria. So with this is the level 100 tree, just like that I usually do, and with the last 6 skill points I choose to get Blast Waves for 3 AoE, and then Survivalist, as well as yeah, that's the 6 there. Now, if you didn't want Survivalist or Blast Waves, if you think that you have enough AoE, you could definitely spend those 4 points going for Throat Seeker, which adds a good chunk of extra damage as well. And then just put these 2 points in, I don't know, anything that's beneficial, I guess. But yeah, though, that's where that is. Now, for the damage, I do have everything on my current character on here. Now, I did have to do Allocate's Whisper of Doom, because for some reason the Awakened Curse on it, even on the community version of Path of Building, just doesn't work. So in order to actually have those 3 curses in the effective calculation, I had to do that. But with Bottled Faith, instead of the Sulfur Flask, you can get like 10% more damage, unsurprisingly, because Bottled Faith is just that overpowered in some instances. So with the damage output, it does say that I do 1.3 million about average mine damage. Now the problem is, you have to keep in mind, is that is with all 21 mines active. So if you're doing a boss, you can kind of, in a way, realistically get that at the start of fighting a boss. But most of the time, you're probably only going to have maybe 10 at most active. And the first mine that you activate is going to do that amount of damage. So let's just say, on average, I'll do 700k damage, which, if you have high enough mine throwing speed, that's actually quite significant. But at the same time, it's not, it doesn't look as nice as the full 21. So the thing with this build is that I have had great success with it, doing delirium encounters all the way up to tier 16 rare maps. Now, if you're doing full juiced maps to like the maximum amount, or you're doing how do you say that, simulacrums with or anything with 5 layers of delirium, this build or at least the way that I have it set up, does not have the damage output to do that endgame stuff. And to be completely honest, I have no idea how you even get that damage output unless you have a build to the quality of a streamer, or you find some extreme exploit of some mechanic. But anyway, the damage output is really good. And the survivability isn't half bad for the most part. But I will say this, if you've never played Mines before, I wouldn't recommend using Mines as a League starter, because Mines are very clunky in many ways, especially at the start. Mostly because I didn't know that you could put your detonate mines on your left mouse button. That was kind of the biggest thing. But even with that, it still feels awkward to need to move a space in order to actually deal damage. And in some instances, the mines detonating can be a definite issue. And if you get stunned, you cannot activate your mines, and that includes smoke mine. So if you use smoke mine and then you get stunned right before you detonate your smoke mine to get away, you can't detonate it, and if you get stun locked, it's a guaranteed death. I mean, stun locking typically does anyway, for most instances, but this character especially, if you get stunned while having mines out, you can't do anything until you get unstunned. So I would highly recommend using the Brine King Pantheon, because you cannot be stunned if you've stunned or blocked a stunning hit in the past 2 seconds. And then it also has some freezing effects, but my boots don't allow me to be frozen or chilled at all, so that is quite handy. So with that, yes, this build definitely has the damage output there, but I wouldn't. It isn't good enough to do like the top of the top end content in Path of Exile. Like, you can comfortably do tier 16s, I would say, for the most part, and some super bosses if you are knowledgeable enough to dodge their moves effectively long enough to kill them, but that's pretty much effective for any build. Well, what I'm trying to say is that you might see videos of mines just completely obliterating bosses, and I can tell you that any high level stuff, talking about the red maps worth, you will not be obliterating them. It will still take probably a good minute in order to kill them, so you still need to know their moves and play accordingly. So with that, let's get back into the game for some final thoughts. Okay, now before we quick go into the game again, I did want to mention one thing beforehand. So with all the boosts, I have 0.32 mine throwing time, and that is with Minefield Support. So you can pretty much throw out 15 mines per second, which is quite a bit. The most important thing, though, is that it says that I have 100% crit chance, and that is with enemies being chilled, as well as the enemies are standing on consecrated ground from the sulfur flask. So if you don't have them be on your consecrated ground, you're going to get 90% crit chance. Now, if you don't want to use a sulfur flask and you don't want to use Bottle of Faith, another way to make sure that you have pretty much maxed out crit chance is by using a diamond flask. So I just wanted to quick mention that. So, back to the game quick. Alright. So I just wanted to show just one more thing. So, in the gameplay that I'm gonna put in the front of at the beginning of the video, is probably already gonna show this, but I really wanted to show off this is kind of like the throwing speed that you are going to be looking at here with your max charges. So with Minefield Support, it isn't bad. And with all of my boosts on and everything, I get around 200,000 tooltip damage. And with Wave of Conviction, as you can see here, it definitely works with the 3 curses there. Now, granted that this was only the Atziri that I use for demonstration purposes, but yeah, overall, this build, like I said in the path of building, it does have decent damage output, but at the same time, it's not going to be obliterating bosses, unfortunately. If you want to be obliterating bosses, honestly, ever since they buffed them in 3.9, I'm not entirely sure how I'm not skilled enough to make a build that has that level of damage. But if you are interested in mines and we're looking at something to get you in the right direction, this might be a good starting point to get an idea of what they're like. So hopefully you've enjoyed this, and thank you very much for watching, and have a wonderful day.